really happened here? What really happened on the day the finished mystery came out? It looks like the events might be reversed here. By that morning, before noon, Rutherford has already voted in a new board of directors. Before he even tells the old board of directors that they're no longer in, he basically kicks a couple of them out. Before the book is even released.
Now, is there a contradiction?
There's some contradictions even in the Divine Purpose book, right? So the charter says the corporation is formed for publishing tracts, pamphlets, booklets, and such. And here it says the board of directors hadn't been consulted. But now the book was completed and released. Well, Rutherford went against the charter by publishing it without the board of directors. They were the ones in charge. And so what did he try to do? His scheme was to get rid of the board of directors, saying, well, they weren't legally elected. But that would have disqualified him as well, because only directors could be elected to office. So if they weren't elected as a director, neither was he. He shouldn't have been president.
But he did it anyway. which the irony of that is just comical, satirical. I mean, I just... Yeah. Well, here's another interesting thing around that time. I think in the film Faith in Action, we're culminating into all this period with the finished mystery and all that. One of the governing body makes a comment that because of all this happening, that's how they knew that Jehovah chose their organization.
This is not a work of man. This is a work of Jehovah God. It's evident that Jehovah had already chosen this organization. And because of the faithfulness and the sincerity of the men who were behind it, it's obvious that Jehovah had already chosen this organization to get his work done.
Well, I thought in 1919, after they proved themselves, that they were chosen. So why did Jehovah need to choose and then re-choose? I mean, what happened there?
It's Rutherford saying it's all about me. That's really what it is, right?
Yeah, but with that said, yeah. In one statement, God chose it back in 1917. Well, wait, you're re-choosing that there also contradicts the 1919 theory or belief, whatever you want to call it, in itself. Because if they were already chosen, then that didn't happen in 1919. It happened prior to that.
That's why they go back and forth, 1917, 1918, 1918, 1919, 1918, 1919. Now it's almost, in the modern literature, it's almost always 1919 because of that, tying it in with that prison experience. Again, we had that discussion already in the Watchtower's second trumpet blast discussion that we had, which we called Judge Rutherford Judges the Sheep and the Goats. Rutherford basically says, I went to prison. This parable's all about me. I'm the chosen one. Therefore, our organization is the chosen one. That proves we're chosen.
Well, and again, another contradiction at that rough point in the Faith in Action video. They're making a statement that Russell predicted 40 years earlier that in 1914, then coming to the realization that Christ's presence began in 1914.
Compounded by natural grief over Russell's death.
Well, it was a big shock because they were used to his taking the lead, and they figured he was going to take the lead until the Lord came and took them all to heaven, and they just didn't know what to do for a while. They were totally shocked.
Rather than giving in to disappointment over what did not happen in 1914, the Bible students kept their minds open to the significance of what had taken place. The World War and its aftermath had become the world-shaking events proclaimed by Russell almost 40 years earlier. The Bible students were coming to the realization that Christ's presence began in 1914, and that the world's last days were underway.
That's not an accurate statement.
Well, not only do they make claims about 1914 that weren't what was taught about 1914, certain things that were taught about 1914, they never, ever mention. Another discussion for another time.
Rutherford directed that Russell's notes for a 7th volume of Studies in the Scriptures be compiled into a new book called The Finished Mystery.
On the day that the book was completed and he had a supply in his office, he arranged for the brothers to put one at each table place in the dining room. And so when the family came down to eat, each one had a copy of the book, The Finished Mystery. Some were quite curious about it and wondered what it was all about and enthused about it, but there was already a growing tension in the family because some of the responsible brothers sort of resented Brother Rutherford. Some of them had ambitions for themselves, so they used the occasion to bring accusations against Brother Rutherford for having gone ahead and published this without their permission and their knowledge. And the result was eventually about a 5-hour tirade against Brother Rutherford, where a number brought a lot of unjust accusations against him. Brother Macmillan tells that, well, that day they left the dining room and most of the food was uneaten and the family was very sad.
Rutherford gives a few more details on harvest siftings. He names names, right? He says it was Hirsch and Hoskins who attacked immediately after the distribution. Yet Rutherford mentions he had the manuscript and the printing done in secret, and he was going to submit the proofs to the board for them to approve, but because of their opposition, he chose not to even show it to them. So that means
the board set up by the will, by the direction of how it should be outlined, might have not done what you wanted to do, so you don't run it by them.
Well,
that's
what
exactly
Rutherford, yeah, but what Rutherford is saying, what Rutherford's saying here is basically they were opposing me before the day of the finished mystery. And so I chose not to even let them see the proof of the book and chose to publish it anyway. So why is Watchtower depicting it in the film that they only started to oppose after the book was put out on the table? There's some interesting things that Rose Hirsch, the wife of Robert Hirsch, one of the old board of directors, wrote in some letters that we have access to about that morning when the books were released and the old board was put out. Rose says that Rutherford had already arranged for 4 others to take the place of the 4 deposed directors, and he had these brethren there in the dining room at his table. At this time he was usurping authority of the management of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. She continues a little bit further down. She says, yes, we were all forced to leave, the 4 directors and their wives. I was at the time manager of the bookstore at the Tabernacle at this time and was discharged and requested to appear for service at Bethel, which I never did. Finally, she says, this all, the bringing in the new directors and putting out the old ones, took place in the dining room at Bethel after the dinner was served. This went on from about 12:30 for about 5 hours. I was present for only the very last hour or 2, having charge of the bookstore at the Tabernacle, and could not leave until someone came to take my place there at the store. Now, as for how the book was delivered, it's not as the film here describes it. Rose writes the following, and the finished mystery book was there on one of the dining room tables, but was not the bone of contention. Basically, the books were all stacked on one table, and then if they wanted one, they could go get one. Rutherford says that himself in his papers, but it was not laid out on the dining room tables as they show in the film here. There's also a funny story that's told about that day. When they were reading the book on the table, there were 2 sisters sitting next to each other, and one of them started giggling. And one turned to the other and asked, why are you laughing? And she said, well, when you get to such and such a page, then we'll talk about it. When she got to the page about the furlongs, being the measurement from Scranton all the way to Brooklyn, as long as you took the Hoboken ferry, She laughed as well. Now, on the witness stand, it's interesting that Fisher is asked, I understand, Mr. Fisher, that on the 17th day of July 1917, you became a director of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, or the People's Pulpit Association. Fisher answered, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. That is the date to the best of my knowledge. Question, this is a Pennsylvania corporation? Fisher answered, I wouldn't say that date. A few days before was the date on which I became a director. It is a Pennsylvania corporation. So why is Watchtower depicting it in the film that they only started to oppose after the book was put out on the table?
And that the book came from Russell's notes.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting point, because in the trial transcript, Rutherford versus United States, they talk to the writers and they interrogate them about the writing of the book, the publishing of the book. Remember, Fisher is our man who dared disfellowship Rutherford. If you haven't seen that discussion, take a look. It's very interesting. Now, on the witness stand, the question's asked to Fisher, have you read any of Woodworth's part of it before you received a copy of the book? Any of his proof, his preparation? Answer, I had read little portions of his manuscript. And then he's asked several times, how much of it? A few pages. And again he's asked, were you not interested enough in Woodworth's work and yours as the product of both of your labors to read the book at all? Fisher responds, I was in a very much exhausted condition from the work I had done on it, and I did no reading particularly for some little time then. He was asked again, but you did read it, didn't you? Fisher responded, a portion of it, not the whole book. And then he's questioned again, you never read this book after you all had worked it out and prepared it? Fisher responded, it was months before I read the portion prepared by Mr. Woodworth. And then he's asked again, you got a copy in July 1917, and then the months would be August and September? Fisher responded, 2 or 3 or 4 months, I can't remember just when. I would tell you if I knew. So basically, Fisher only knew his portion of the book, the Ezekiel portion. He had not really read Woodworth's portion of the book. And then there's some other interesting things about what happened to Fisher's part of the book. If you haven't seen our discussion again on the man who dared disfellowship Rutherford, it's interesting to see that after Fisher threatened to disfellowship Rutherford and unfortunately died before he could do that, that after Fisher's death, when Rutherford republished The Finished Mystery in 1927, he published it without the Ezekiel portion. And one of the first verse-by-verse commentaries Rutherford publishes is his own take on Ezekiel. And, of course, it's all about Rutherford and Watchtower after 1918 and 1919. Fisher's asked again about the edits that was made to his portion of the book. He's asked, now you said that you wrote the article on page 406 of The Finished Mystery, beginning with, they have blown the trumpet, except a certain portion of it. What was the portion you did not write? Fisher responded, the last sentence. Question. There is a hint here that conscription will meet with opposition. Fisher responded, yes, sir. He was asked, you did not write that? No, sir, Fisher said. Then he was asked, when did you first see that in print? And Fisher said, some months after the book came out, when I first read the book cover and toto. Then he was asked, did any of the defendants tell you they put it in there? And Fisher responded, yes, sir. And then he was asked which one, and Fisher said, Mr. Woodworth. And then he was asked, was he writing part of your part of the book? Fisher responded, he wrote this. Then he was asked, did you write any part of his part of the book? And Fisher said, no, sir. He was asked again, put that in unbeknown to you, part of your work. And Fisher said, it was put in afterwards, Your Honor, after I had finished my part of the work. Then Mr. Oland asked, it was put in before the first copy was printed, was it not? And Fisher said, yes, sir. He was asked, he did not consult with you about it? You were expounding Ezekiel then? And Fisher said, yes, sir. And then he was asked, his idea was that Ezekiel, in writing the 7th chapter, 14th verse, had in mind that conscription would meet with opposition? No, sir, Fisher responded. That would require some explanation. In speaking of the apostles' message, it says, they did not understand what they said. They spoke mechanically, but the Lord knew what was meant. So again he's asked a little bit further, did not this Mr. Woodworth make an addition to your work without your knowledge and consent? And Fisher said, I might state that as to the method that we took, that it was very much too large and had to be cut down in places. How much I do not know, but 1/2 or 1/3 from what the original manuscript was, and I was very busy working out, trying to understand this book. It was extremely difficult to get any explanation of it at all, and as I understand, Mr. Woodworth did the cutting out of the entire book after the manuscript was all finished. For such cutting down, did you know that he was going to cut it down? And Fisher said, I knew it was to be cut down. Then he was asked, then you knew that your work was turned over to him for such cutting down as he desired? And Fisher said, well, any changes in my work amounted to mostly 2 improvements. He was asked, you knew that your work was turned over to him for revision? And Fisher said, to a limited extent. There was a very limited revision or change made in my part. Question, this was not a cutting down, but an adding to? Fisher said, evidently, yes, sir. Question, this was added to? Yes, sir. Question, did you say you did not finish your part of it until June 25th, 1917? Fisher said that was the date I had because I had no record of the date. It must have been before the last manuscript was in. Question, you knew that the Conscription Act or Selective Draft Act was passed in May 1917 before this was written? And he said, yes, sir, I knew that. And it was before Mr. Woodworth put in this part. There is a hint here that conscription will meet with opposition. And Fisher said, yes, sir, it was before that. Question, so he could not have had anything in mind except referring to the Selective Draft Act. You did not know of any other conscription act except what we know as a Selective Draft Act? And Fisher said, I didn't know at what time that was done. I didn't know anything about it. Question, and as conscription did meet with opposition in other countries, it was a safe prophecy to say it would meet with it here. And Fisher's response was, I don't know anything about what was intended by this. I can't tell you. A lot of the Ezekiel parts that the government objected to were written by Woodworth and added in after Fisher finished his portion of the book. And this continues even further. You said that on the next page there was something added on page 407. There was a literal fulfillment of this scripture in 1898, and so forth. You did not write that in the book? And Fisher said, to the best of my knowledge and recollection, I did not. And then he was asked, who wrote that? Fisher said, I think Mr. Woodworth did. Question, you knew that he was going to make additions and corrections in your work, and you assented to it? And Fisher responded, yes, sir. Question, when did you first see this part of the book there on page 247? When did you first see that production of Mr. Woodworth's? Answer, my memory would have to be refreshed so that I could tell you the exact date. Question, you saw it when you read the book over? Answer, yes, sir. Question, did you not talk with Mr. Woodworth prior to the time you read it over? Didn't you talk to Mr. Woodworth about this paragraph? Answer, I think I did. Question, how long before you read it in print was it that you talked with him about this paragraph? Answer, that I could not say without refreshing my memory. Question, wasn't it at the time that you and he were collaborating together in the preparation of the book? Answer, I believe. Question, you knew that was in there before the book was published? Answer, I knew it was in there. So you talked to Mr. Woodworth about it? Yes, sir. You knew that it was to go into the publication? I did not know what was to go into the publication, Mr. Oland. You did see it in the publication when it came out? Yes, sir. You knew he was proposing this for the publication? Yes, sir.
My whole thought on Fisher's writings being revised are this. To sum it all up, and I can't see how anyone could even think about it in any other light. His inspiration to write these things was okay when he was in favor with those powers to be. The moment he fell out of grace with them, all of a sudden it's not true anymore. So let's believe this. And that's in essence what they're saying. Well, we can't believe that anymore because we don't like him. We'll believe this. This is true. So where are they coming up with what is true? How do you define truth when you're liked and popular and you write something? Oh, I think Revelation means this. Oh, I think Ezekiel means this. Oh, we like you, so we're going to accept that. So that's my thought, basically, on Fisher's writings.
The timing of all this is also interesting for me, because when Fisher, and we discussed this in our Man Who Dared Disfellowship Rutherford discussion, but just to summarize, when Fisher had 2 or 3 witnesses in order to start the trial, and unfortunately passed away before that could happen, when Rutherford had the finished mystery republished, he removed the Ezekiel portion of the finished mystery that Fisher had written. I don't know if it was out of spite or whatever, but the first verse-by-verse commentaries Rutherford writes are his books on vindication, which is a commentary on Ezekiel. That was Rutherford's replacement. And this is when the name changes from the International Bible Students Association to the Jehovah's Witnesses, and that replacement theology comes in. It all came out of that Rutherford moment of saying, hey, I went to prison. It's all about me, and applying everything he could find in Scripture to Watchtower Society after 1914 and 1919.
But in reality, it contradicts.
And he was the one who took the lead. So it's basically, it's all about me. I went to prison. It's all about me. I'm the chosen one. It's basically all of Watchtower theology is based on that. It's just amazing.
When in reality, the book Comfort for the Jews was the anti-replacement theology. So rather than admitting you were wrong about Jews getting into the homeland in 1925, okay, it's 1930, it hasn't happened. Well, wait, I'm not wrong. New light kicks in. God disfavored the Jews. And once again, it adds something to that. I believe it will.
Before you get to that, that's in our Watchtower Third Trumpet discussion. Remember, in 1924 at that Columbus Convention, Rutherford says, well, I had expected, we're looking forward to 1925 happening, and we had expected the Jews would return to Israel, and we don't see them there because they should be there to blow a literal trumpet that the Jubilees come.
We blew it.
We blew the trumpet. We're the ones proclaiming the message, so it's going to happen, but spiritually. So every time Watchtower couldn't, instead of admitting they made a mistake, they spiritualized the interpretation.
Rutherford directed that Russell's notes for a 7th volume of Studies in the Scriptures be compiled into a new book called The Finished Mystery.
As Fisher said, there were no notes left for the publication of The Finished Mystery. All they had were Watchtower articles that had been written decades previously. And these were summarized by Clayton Woodworth himself in the book that he compiled, Berean Scripture Study Manual. There were no notes left, really no notes left for the publication of the book. So what they took is the Watchtower articles that were written about Revelation, which is only in the early years. There really weren't that many written later. And when Russell was asked about Revelation, he said, I don't know. That's honest. Just say, I don't know. And before he dies, they ask, well, who's going to write the 7th volume? And he says, I don't know. He basically says he said, I don't have the key to understand Revelation. He just didn't get it. So they took those notes.
He was honest about it.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Be honest about it. They took those early articles and they crafted a lot of things around it. And it's interesting because Fisher is asked on the bench, on the witness stand, did you write this or this or this? He said, no, that was added after. So not only did he write something, but Woodworth went in later and was editorializing and changing what he wrote. So a lot of the book was all Clayton Woodworth's, especially the weird stuff in Revelation.
Which they apparently accepted, Rutherford himself too, but then all of a sudden in Light, right? That's the book Rutherford wrote. That's the new revelation understanding, and then that has changed multiple times over the years. So apparently that wasn't the correct version of revelation or interpretation.
You know,
Another
we've
discussion,
mentioned
I know.
we've mentioned that before. Also, in our third trumpet blast, when light came out, it was a revelation that it was new light that they didn't understand previously. It's a good thing we understand Revelation now. Well, isn't that what you said about the Revelation book before that? You know, it changes and evolves over time as the culture around them shifts. Their interpretations change as well. It's very interesting. These convention reports, where they had a stenographer take down the different lectures and things that were taken or that were given, the sermons. They had question meetings where they would ask Russell questions. And sometimes they would ask him, what about the finished mystery? What about the seventh volume? What about Revelation? And he was very honest by stating, I really don't know. I when I get the key, I'll write it. When I can try to understand it, I'll write it. Better to say you don't really know than to try and make something up.
but wait, that contradicts what the society post Russell claimed immediately after the death, that book, The Finished Mystery, was from excerpts and notes and writings of Russell himself on Revelation, which there's no documentation that he ever gave them anything of such a sort anyway.
But there is documentation that there were notes. As if we look in the Rutherford versus United States trial transcript, the questions asked, what notes were left over. And basically all they did is take excerpts where certain passages were mentioned in different Watchtower articles from various years and stitched it together and then tried to fill in the gaps in between. There were a lot of gaps that were filled in.
Those weren't really notes. Those were printed excerpts, not notes. When they said his notes, that was once again a Watchtower Society implication of something that, well, these were his notes. The first thing you think of is, oh, he had his writings ready together and we took it from that. This is all brand new. So the term notes is misleading. Again, why didn't they just say we took excerpts from his? They didn't want people to know. They just took excerpts from his printed Watchtower articles, which he also claimed wasn't a full understanding.
If they had done that, it would have hurt the book sales.
Exactly. Forensically, this has been dismantled and put back together properly.
The Society has published many books on Revelation over the years. The original Finished Mystery, of course, then the edited Finished Mystery with only the Revelation part, without the Ezekiel portion, and the altered Revelation 12 chapter, the summarized and paraphrased Finished Mystery, Pocket Edition, Light, Volume 1 and 2, Babylon the Great Has Fallen, God's Kingdom Rules, Then is Finished, The Mystery of God, the first Revelation, Its Grand Climax at Hand, and then the revised Revelation, Its Grand Climax at Hand, as well as corrections that came out following its printing. Over the years, Watchtower has published several various books trying to explain Revelation.
Starting with the Finished Mystery.
Mystery. And when it got to Light, it started that it's all about me. It's all about us interpretive scheme. So when you have to take an entire book and say, hey, we're the ones that prophesied in that book. It's all about us. It should make you question things and try to see, do those interpretations really fit? Is it really all about this one specific group? And as the years go by, the interpretations get simplified, watered down, shortened, and all the little details and facts and measurements and various things that they use to try and prove or give as the evidence has simply been pushed away and just replaced with a general overview of how it applies to us as Watchtower.
Which means if the evidence wasn't really the evidence in the first place, then the claim based on the evidence is not factual. It's like when you're proving a scientific data, scientific solution to something, you comprise the data why that would be the solution. Well, when the data doesn't add up and work anymore, is it still a trumpet blast? you know, yeah. I mean, that's you have to logically take it through that step.
And that's one way to track how did Watchtower doctrine become what it is today. Well, go to those Watchtower conventions, those trumpet blasts, follow them from year to year to year. Watchtower, since Rutherford's time, whenever they came out with new light, it was always at these conventions. And so it's very easy to trace how Watchtower became what it is today by looking at those trumpet blasts. We have more coming in that. We have the first 3 done, 4 more to go. But, you know, as we were saying here about this harvest siftings, that opposition didn't happen on the day of the finished mystery. And he says clearly in Harvest Siftings 2, everything was smooth until June. So he tells you the opposition started a month before. So everything was smooth until then. Why didn't he tell the others what he was doing before June? Mm-hmm. Months and months went by. He's premeditated already what he's going to do. He's already got it all worked out. So,
and the fact that he had support in that shows that others likely knew what he was doing too, and keeping from the others.
Yeah, how could they be opposed to a printing of a book if they didn't know a book was being printed? Mm-hmm. It's a simple question. Mm-hmm. You know, and the charter said that they should have been notified. They weren't. In the Rutherford versus United States trial transcript, Macmillan basically reads the preface and doesn't read the rest of the book. Nobody read the book except Rutherford. Rutherford didn't really editorialize it. The book was never edited. There's a statement in the finished mystery that says, we'll just put a statement here. We don't really know what to put here, but we'll put something in the future.
And the clergy really hated the book.
Did they?
According to this video. So maybe that was the reason for all the confusion.
We're going to see what the clergy was involved in very shortly here. So the 1975 yearbook drops this mention of Hirsch and Hoskins. They focus specifically on Johnson. So the yearbook suggests that it was because of this instance that Rutherford sought to remove the board of directors before the finished mystery was distributed. So the film makes it look like everything was because of the finished mystery. It's all convoluted and compressed and stretched and molded into a whole new narrative that you can't find in the documented evidence that's available from Watchtower itself.
And what happens when you go outside of Watchtower for documentation?
We'll see in just a little bit. We're going to get into some of that. So before any of the directors could prepare a defense, Rutherford had them put physically out of the house, out of the Bethel home. And so Johnson writes in his book, Marianism, he says, basically, Rutherford ordered me to leave Bethel that day, and the 4 board members to leave the following Monday. I was denied a respectful and repeated request for the privilege to make a statement to the family. Brother Hirsch was asked to read a letter that Brother Pearson wrote to the effect that he disapproved of Rutherford's ousting the 4 brothers from the board, and that he would firmly stand for and by the old board. Rutherford fairly shouted that he was induced by Brother Johnson's falsehoods to write that letter. So he didn't even believe that it was written by Pearson. He thought Johnson just made it completely up. Still more wrathful, he ordered me to leave Bethel on the pain of legal proceedings. I replied that I had appealed to the board from the decision, and that since I recognized the board as in control, and in the case of an appeal as having the right to decide the question, I waited its decision, and that if it ordered me to leave, I would do so at once. At this, he completely lost self-control. To enforce his order, he rushed me out, crying out, "You leave this house!" Grabbing me by the arm, he almost jerked me off my feet. That doesn't look like the video at all. It's the opposite.
And with that said, for you to strictly believe what the Watchtower wrote about this situation, that is very, yes, it is a viewpoint of it and a perspective. But wait, you have to listen to another perspective. You can't just say, no, the Watchtower said this, and that happened, so that's what we believe. Well, wait. And these things being written weren't written 100 years later and shown to the public. These things were common knowledge amongst the Bible students of that time. So this was all out there in the open of what was happening.
Yeah.
It's just not printed in the Watchtower. It's documented elsewhere.
Wait for Rude's book, because remember, we had the interview with him. He's going to deal with this in a great amount of detail. But how can you know the truth about something? You don't just accept one witness's version of the story. What does the scripture say? By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter shall be confirmed.
Unless they're 3 years old.
So, another story for another time. But, you know, you don't take just witnesses from one side. You got to hear the witnesses from all sides of the story. And when you take all of the witnesses, all of the stories from all the various angles and put it together, only then can you get a full and complete story. So as we saw in our discussion with Rude Person, Rutherford was playing dirty. And he illegally and premeditatively managed to wrangle control of Watchtower. The directors, of course, threatened to sue, and due to letters from Watchtower followers, they chose to consider 1 Corinthians 6 and not taking their brother to court.
And again, as we said before, it's not because they didn't have the ability or the legality to sue. Okay? The congregation, the members themselves said, no, don't do that. And then most of them just left anyway. They wanted nothing to do with what became of that. They just walked away. That doesn't mean just because the society, Rutherford and all them won that war, that doesn't mean it was a righteous war or a justified win. It just means they won by default, because as the documentation shows, the brethren just said, no, don't waste our time.
After the Finnish mystery was published, there were efforts by the government of both the United States and Canada to suppress its distribution. Well, why? What really happened?